Well, greetings, brethren, and welcome to this afternoon session of Sabbath services for this. Let's come in tighter and get our lower third on the screen down below us for this 11th day of the 8th month bull on God's sacred calendar. It is the 24th day of the month of October 2015 on the pagan Roman calendar that man created. Hope you had a good week. What we got for you this Sabbath is a little different than what I did on the morning session where we were broadcasting in the early morning hours from the Central Time Zone so that we would be live in the UK before Sabbath is over. That many of you have asked me to be sure and do, and I've noticed you've been watching live from the UK on the Sabbath, so thank you for that, because if I get up early to do that, to fulfill that request that you have that I be live before the Sabbath's over, I appreciate that you're there watching. If I get up that early and have my donkey come to the window and bray because I didn't get down and feed her before having to go on live. I fed her now in between morning and afternoon service. Well, I only had a few minutes. Went a long time this morning. We got some great stuff for you, though, today. For the kids, whether you're age 5 or 105. I've got a cartoon to start out with that relates to what's happening in world news right now, relates to what Mr. Armstrong is going to say in the video excerpt I have for you of his speaking this morning, and relates to news clips that I have for you that we'll be showing during today's Sabbath service. I'm doing this differently than I did it this morning. I started with Mr. Armstrong first in the morning session. I believe that'll be in the archive a little bit later today. It will be definitely in the archive on our internet service provider for the hosting, for the live stream hosting. It'll be there with all the mistakes I made and everything. Later, though, for YouTube, I hope to create a version where I made a bunch of mistakes trying to get Mr. Armstrong started. 2 videos were firing off at the same time, so you'd hear 2 audio tracks. And I wrestled with that while we were live for maybe 5-10 minutes or so. I can edit it out of the archive version so that people watching from a recording won't have to sit through all that like those who were live had to do. But sometimes when we're live, you can bear with things a little better, even laugh with me and pray with me as mistakes may happen, because live is different than something you pre-record where you can make a mistake and just stop and start the recording again. But you're live, you got to just pick up and keep going best you can, recover from it. Okay, like I say, we're going to start with a cartoon. It's a biblical cartoon that tells the story of the early days of Abraham and Sarah's Egyptian handmaid Hagar, and the son that was born to Hagar, Ishmael. All of this after the time God made a promise to Abraham that he was so happy with Abraham that he said, I will multiply your seed, Abraham, as numberless as the stars of the heaven or the sand of the sea, and to be countless for number. And he said that to both Abraham and Sarai at the time, whose name he later changed to Sarah. Abraham's name then was Abram, which he later changed to Abraham. And he wanted that promise to come through his wife Abraham and his wife Sarah. And they both, after waiting, it was 25 years before they had that child. After 10 years, they decided that, hey, why don't you go in, with Sarah's suggestion, why don't you go into my Egyptian handmaid Hagar, let her bear a child on my knees. It'll be as if it were your child, Abraham, and it'll be my child, because the agreement was she would bear that child on my knees, on Sarah's knees, and it would be Sarah's child. But after Hagar was still pregnant, I'm with child, this is my child. She didn't want to keep that arrangement with Sarah. And so right from the get-go, there was some strife, tension, great animosity between Sarah and Hagar. This movie brings all of that out. And today the descendants of Hagar and Ishmael are the Arab people over in quote-unquote Palestine, the Middle East. And we know we have great problems today from between Ishmael and his offspring and the offspring, the descendants of Isaac. Isaac, who had the son Jacob, he also had the son Esau, which is modern-day Turkey, Uncle Esau over there. And Isaac, whose name was changed, Isaac also had Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Israel had 12 sons, including Joseph, who had the two sons Ephraim and Manasseh, today modern-day United Kingdom and the United States. And all of that, God explaining in Genesis 49 where Jacob's sons, Israel's sons, would be in the latter days. We know where they are today. Here's a brief look on this slide that we'll put on the screen right now that shows you where the 12 tribes, 13 if you count Joseph's two sons as the two half-tribes mixed in with the lost 10. The lost 10 tribes are counted as 10, which includes counting Ephraim and Manasseh separately, 1, 2, and then 8 more, because Joseph received a double promise, and his two sons mixed in with the 10 tribes that went with the house of Israel under Jeroboam. When Jeroboam split off 10 tribes from Solomon's son Rehoboam, back after Solomon died. Anyway, there's a look at where all 13 tribes are today, counting Joseph as 2, Ephraim and Manasseh. That makes it add up to 13, like I said. And we'll look at that. But the problem between the tribes of Israel and the descendants of Isaac, who was this... I was saying tribes of Israel, who are the sons of Isaac, and the descendants of Ishmael. The problem between those two, let's put it this way, between Isaac and between Ishmael today, is largely because of a poor sportsmanship on the part of the descendants of Ishmael. Now, Ishmael at first showed love for his younger brother, but then as the mama, Hagar, began to introduce a jealousy over Isaac having received the blessing of the eternal and not her son, that began to infiltrate little Ishmael somewhat as well. And now today the descendants of Ishmael are full of a jealousy, a hatred for Isaac. The hatred because of a jealousy over the promises God gave Isaac. And so 600 years after Christ came, the Roman Catholic Church helped the descendants of Ishmael put together this book called the Quran, and they set up the prophet Muhammad to be above Jesus Christ in regard or respect, and they relegated Jesus, instead of being the Christ, they relegated him to a prophet of a lower degree than Muhammad. And they made the false claim, a lie, outright lie, that Abraham was told to take Ishmael up on the mountain and sacrifice him, and that after doing so, God made the promise of the land of Palestine to Ishmael. That's a big lie. Big lie. And the quote-unquote Holy Quran is not the holy book of God. It's not sanctified and set apart by the great Creator God. Anyway, this movie will bring out the history of Abraham and Sarah, Sarah's handmaid Hagar, and Hagar's son Ishmael. And God did give some blessings to Ishmael, gave him promise of 12 great chiefs or chiefdoms or dukes that would be born of Ishmael, and they would become a thorn in the side of all their brethren, even one another. And especially somewhat the brothers of and descendants of Isaac, and the brothers of Jacob's 12 sons. Now, after that, we'll have Mr. Armstrong giving an excerpt that relates to today's world news, more so than at the time when he spoke it, because God had him speaking ahead for us, with God realizing that God was going to do a delay that he talked about in Matthew 25, with all the virgins sleeping, and even mentioning a delay, and he had a reason and a purpose. He knew he would need to do a delay because he knew, God knew, once his servant, his human leader, Mr. Armstrong, died, and the prophesied great falling away would have to come so that God could see, as 1 Corinthians 11:19 says, he could see who is manifest in his way, who is approved, who chooses to go with Baal worship and who chooses to stay with worship of the great Creator God and the continuing to observe and keep the Sabbath, or who would give it up. And it's been a delay for that test, that during that test, those of us who have stayed faithful also have had a time of grace, extra time to get our act together, extra time to prove ourselves, extra time to get sin out of our lives, as the days of unleavened bread teach us we have to do. We have our part in that. We have to put sin out. We don't just kick back and say, Lord, here's my heart. You just do it all for me now. Don't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. We have to put sin out. We have to develop character that is like that Abraham showed before God when God said, Abraham, I want you to take Isaac up to the mountain and sacrifice him. You can just see the thoughts going through Abraham's mind. Yeah, but God, I had to wait so long, and you promised that the numberless offspring was going to come through Isaac. And you promised me that even after I said, look, Abraham said to you, look, just make Ishmael the guy that has all them offspring you promised me. God said, nope, it's going to be through Isaac. And then God tells Abraham to take Isaac up on the mountain. So you can see, boy, what a confusing God, some people might think. But Abraham believed God, learned through the test of time that God keeps his word, did have him have a son by Sarah, even though Sarah laughed, and Abraham doubted it too at first when he went along with Sarah's suggestion to go have a child via Hagar. And then God comes around after he has that child with Hagar, and God even had it named Ishmael, and says, you're still going to have a son of promise through Sarah, and he will be the son who will be named Isaac, through whom I will give you the blessing of all that huge, numberless offspring. Again, as numberless as the stars of heaven to be counted, or the sand of the sea, the grains of the sand of sea, and there are grains of sand along the seaside shore. This little cartoon video, it has that history for us, and it helps us be aware of what's happening today, because Ishmael's right in the face of Isaac, especially in the Middle East, especially in the little state of Israel, where Jerusalem is located today, and where the United Nations this past Wednesday just passed a resolution that is giving a couple of the areas that are unique to the offspring of Isaac and Israel. They're considering it to be Muslim sites, one of them being Rachel's tomb, which today is the day of the annual pilgrimage to Rachel's tomb by many Jews in honor of the anniversary of her death. And Rachel, as many of you may and should know, was the mother of Joseph. She was one of the wives of Jacob, the wife that Jacob loved. She had the two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And then her handmaid had a couple of the children, and Leah had all the rest of the children. Leah and Leah's handmaid had the rest of the children, as shown on this chart. I've got it broken down in reverse order here. Leah actually had the first child, Reuben. She had the second child, Simeon, the third child, Levi. The fourth child, Judah, was born of Leah as the fourth born. Then Leah's handmaid had the next couple of kids, Dan and Naphtali. Then finally, Rachel begins to get in on the act a little bit with Rachel's handmaid, having Gad and Asher. Then Leah has a couple more kids, Issachar and Zebulun. And you see on the thing here, I'm going from the bottom to the top, and it shows you who each one is. As I name them, Reuben, France, Simeon and Levi are scattered, so is Judah. Dan is Denmark and Ireland, Naphtali, Sweden, Gad, Switzerland, Asher, Belgium and Luxembourg, and Issachar, Finland, and Zebulun, the Netherlands, or the Dutchlands. All right, then, finally, let's see, who is it here? Okay, then finally, Rachel has Joseph, and to Joseph, in between there, is born of Joseph's wife, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Rachel had the last child of the bunch, Benjamin, the little young Benjamin, who wound up joining with Judah and Levi and Simeon as the house of Judah. And then you take those 4 out of the 13. Oh, what do you get there? Oh, half of Benjamin went with Judah. And so the lost 10 tribes actually, though, does include half of Benjamin. And it includes the Ephraim and Manasseh counted separately. All right, there's a little overview of tribes are today. And with Judah and Benjamin and Levi and some of Benjamin being over largely in the state of Israel today, they are getting the main flack from the descendants of Ishmael. And really getting it today is they want to visit Rachel's tomb amid the terror surge, where the UNESCO has just named that to be an Islam site. Now, how about that one? We'll be going through those news stories later in the service today. But let's get into the cartoon, get into Mr. Armstrong's comments, then I'll be back to share the current news, including the news of the big Hurricane Patricia, which started out as the worst storm ever in North America, in the Americas, as a Category 5. But once it hit land, it hit in a largely unoccupied area, and it reduced down to a Category 2. I'll have the news on that for you in a little bit today, because news is big now, especially since the first day of Tabernacles this year, 2015. Events have really changed things that are becoming the marking point that really marks the breaking of the pride of the power of the United States in a major way. Not just a wimpy, mess-around way, but a major way. And we'll get to that news. Let's go ahead. For those of you from age 5 to 105, let's enjoy this cartoon showing some history on Abraham and Sarah and their child Isaac, and Abraham and Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian handmaid, and their son Ishmael, who's born first. And then we'll come back, play Mr. Armstrong, and then we'll go through those pertinent news stories of the day that relate to what Mr. Armstrong says about what to be watching for, events that are to happen, that are happening big time, and that relate to Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Isaac and Ishmael. We'll be back after this cartoon. Now, we're going to go over to Mr. Armstrong next in a moment, but I want to explain, first of all, the cartoon does a reasonably good job, but this cartoon gives a good overview. Now, it did not handle the thing with Sarah most perfect. In fact, there seemed to be a little bias, if you ask me, when it comes to the part about where Sarah was upset with Hagar and wanted her out of there. They left out this part that Genesis 21 brings in that helps you understand that really what upset Sarah was this verse in chapter 21 of Genesis, where it says, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking or making fun of Isaac. And wherefore Sarah said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for The son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. Sarah had experienced some Hagar, instead of handing over her son as if the son were Sarah's son, she kept it to herself. And that created a certain animosity. I just wanted to point out that one element because as we've understood it, Hagar and Ishmael Ishmael got the mockery. Even though Ishmael was happy about his little brother being born at first, then after he sees the blessings be given to Isaac, and Isaac is considered, legitimate son, and that thing can be felt. Well, then Isaac or Ishmael and from his mother Hagar, his attitude began to have a certain animosity based on jealousy and a feeling of not fair. The very same thing that Satan the devil put in all of the angels under him. God was not fair. Instead of being thankful for what you do have, and God has the option, prerogative to make whomever he wants this and that, and he loves us all and gives us all blessings. But if he wants to put one over us, hey, that one over us is a servant. We just have more people serving us. So thanks is to be given. Ishmael got blessings because of Isaac and Abraham, and you just got to keep your perspective. And so just with that one element, keep that in mind. The cartoon may have over-presented Sarah as the one that, she was a bitchy old woman, when really she had to suffer the jealousy that Hagar was throwing at her, instead of Hagar staying submissive to her master. Sarah was Hagar's master in the situation they were in, and she lost it. I've got a son by Abraham now. He's as if he were my husband. That other old woman, she's just in my way now. Sarah's in my way. Hagar had that attitude. So there's more to it than the cartoon was brought in. It didn't really bring in that element, so you might have to explain that to your kids if they're not listening to me here today. All right, let's go to Mr. Armstrong next, because he's going to. I've got some excerpts that shows. He's telling us the elements we need to be looking for in today's world news that are happening. Woo! They are happening like never, 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 never before. And let's hear that now from Mr. Armstrong. And happy Sabbath to you on this 8th day of November 2014. All right, I thought I had him queued up, but I guess I missed it. But I played this before some time ago, and I'm using it again today because it really applies to the current news, especially with what happened on Wednesday this week. We got this big hurricane coming in out of below Mexico, Category 5, but when it hit land, it lowered to Category 2. And then big news Wednesday this week. Big news on the first day of Tabernacles, when Russia pulls certain moves. We'll talk about that later. But Wednesday this week, the United Nations, under its UNESCO division, assigned 2 areas that have the caves of the Patriarchs, which Abraham bought, and also Rachel's tomb, which is in Bethlehem, or near Bethlehem. We'll talk about the details later, but it's considered to be part of Bethlehem. Both of those 2 sites, the caves of the Patriarchs and the tomb of Rachel, were designated by the... I thought I put that in pause. Whoop, I missed the pause button. Were designated by the United Nations as Muslim sites. Now, Rachel was a wife of Jacob. Laban pulled a fast one on Jacob and gave him the elder daughter Leah first, and then also gave him Rachel. She was the beloved, though. She was the one that caused Jacob to say he had worked 7 years for Laban because he loved Rachel so much. And then Laban pawns, under a heavy veil, Leah off on him. Then Laban says, well, you can have Rachel too if you work another 7 years for me. And Jacob was willing to do it. He let Laban pull a real good one over on him. But his love for Rachel was so great. And he honored that marriage to Leah, even though he had been defrauded and deceived. Okay, let's go to Mr. Armstrong.
To happen in the world from now. Is World War III imminent? Is it being started? What is going to happen? Catastrophic events are prophesied from here on. They're going to affect you. Now, we've been going through an outline of prophecy, and in the book of Revelation, you find all of the prophecies of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, coordinated as to time sequence. We found that the main prophecy begins in the 6th chapter, and there, when Jesus is opening the seals, he is the revelator, and still what is revealed to us is merely symbol. And so we still can't understand, but Jesus is the revelator. He is the one who reveals and who can make us understand. And so just as Jesus Christ did reveal the meaning of parables in plain language to his disciples, so we find that he does reveal in plain language the meaning of these symbols. They're confused, and the very beginning of all of this Babylon and this confusion comes from confusing the Great Tribulation with the time of the plagues or the day of the Lord. Now, the Great Tribulation is the time of the wrath of Satan the devil. Now, let's read it. Let's go right through it. The day of the Lord is the time of God's wrath. There are two different times, and something divides them. And his angels at the time of his second coming of Christ. And he is going to gather the elect out of their graves and from the four corners of the earth to meet Christ in the air. They, my friends, are the elect. And for the sake of some of those who had grown lukewarm and who had not been taken to a place of safety, and that taking them to a place of safety is right here on this earth, and it isn't any rapture up to heaven at all. Now, here's the first horse, which is the false preachers and the false Christs. And the second seal, the red horse, is the war. The climax is finally in world war. The seal, Jesus explained, interpreted for us, is famine. And the seal, the pale horse, pestilence or disease. Now next comes the opening of the fifth seal, and here it is. See if this isn't the Great Tribulation. And I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God. They're already at this time martyred. The 18th chapter, in the 10th verse, standing afar off, the merchants of the earth and so on, and the great men, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Parted as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. What is going to follow? The signs in the heavens, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then the day of God's wrath, the time of the plagues. Turn real quickly, my friends, back here to Joel. And the 2nd chapter in the 31st verse. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and the terrible day of the Lord.
Okay, friends, caught me with my tie down because it gets a little hot up here without the air conditioner on. I've got a fan running. All right, there's some excerpts I wanted to play for you. I meant to mention before we played that, right after the cartoon, that the cartoon is for those of you watching live. I'm not able to put that in the YouTube archive, but it is in the live streaming host archive. So it'll be there for 30 days. But for those of you watching in YouTube where we said, here's the cartoon, and then I come right back and there was no cartoon there, we had to edit that out because I can't put that in the archive on YouTube. All right? The music. I don't have a license for the music that plays during it. So we had to cut that out. You have to cut it out there. But that's an advantage to watching live. And on the Sabbath especially, I hope you're watching live. And more people do on Sabbath. They watch live. And that's a good experience for me because live, you make a mistake, you just got to keep going. Now, I have some news stories for you that I want to play you. I wanted you to be able to see just how relevant. Now, it is hot up here, and that blasted computer making all kind of noises. Its fan is, but I'm just going to ask you to live with that. I want to share a little bit of news with you from the week, especially we'll get to that story about United Nations assigning the caves of the Patriarchs and the tomb of Rachel, as a Muslim site. They were going to do the same thing with the Western Wall, but that got pushed aside. Crazy things are happening. The situation is such over there that our brother Reuben, France, modern-day France, sent in its soldiers this past week to calm things down, but Judah said, out of here. We'll take care of things ourselves. Now, Brother Reuben, France represents the United Europe, because France with Germany is a big part of United Europe, even though ultimately France may get kicked out of there being one of the tribes of Israel. When it comes down to the 10, France may be not a part of it. You'd hate to think of France being in there against us like that, but they're going to get it too, I think. But because they are one of the children of Israel that God's going to let Germany punish. Of course, France has tried this Franco-German alliance in the past, and why don't they look at history? It always winds up where Germany double-crosses them and puts them under their thumb. And here they are again, playing footsie with Germany, France, Brother Reuben. And France was going to send in its soldiers to keep calm in Israel. Israel said, no, thank you, out. But what is going to happen is that Europe, at some point, maybe Germany's army will be sent in to surround Jerusalem, and Israel can say out, and they're going to say, sorry, no, you out, we staying. And that'll be the signal to flee when the armies surround Jerusalem and the abomination of desolation is set up. Now, we'll have 30 days. I say flee, but really that flee was the type that happened before when the people were on the ground. For us today, Revelation 12 tells us we're going to fly on the two wings of a great eagle, and God's going to provide that. You know, we're not going to fly ourselves. He's providing two wings of a great eagle. As he provided a great fish for Jonah, he'll be providing a great eagle, two wings of a great eagle for us. Now, that was not a whale. That was a fish that God especially prepared for Jonah, a great fish. And he says, I'm going to fly you on two wings of a great eagle. That language is so similar, it kind of says, well, God is going to prepare an eagle for us. Now, that could be symbolic, meaning a great airplane or a chariot of fire, or it could be very literal, where he will actually fashion a great eagle, and maybe a great eagle for each one of us who is accounted worthy. And, you know, you see them pick up an animal with their claws, and the animal's still alive when that eagle picks them up. We could buy a specially fashioned great eagle by God. We could be picked up like that. I'm not saying that's how it's going to happen. I'm just saying it could. That could very, very well be symbolic language where God flies us to that place of nourishment, protection, training, final training, safety on modern-day jet aircraft that didn't exist at the time of John's writing. Now, what news to give you first? Let's just cover something about Patricia. And over in Athens, they've had some flooding. I think I may have the video on Athens where they've had flooding so great that it piled cars upon one another. And then Patricia starts out, everybody was preparing because of the Category 5 for a worst ever hurricane, Patricia. I'm not sure which news story I have up behind me first because the first frame is not appearing for this one, but let's just pull it forward and roll this next video clip, this news clip I have to show you today, and then we'll get to the stories on UNESCO, and then I'll make some comparison to what Mr. Armstrong said to some of the events that have begun happening to break the pride of the United States power that began to happen in a big, big, big way on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles this year. Let's go to the news story first, and we'll be back to cover all of those things. Oh, okay. We got to get out of that and go to the first news story. Sorry. Now, this is the flooding over in Athens. That is such a flood that you see people standing on walls. And see the cars? Now watch, some of the cars are going to be lifted up and piled on top of one another. This flooding is so great over in Athens. This is not part of the Patricia. There you go. There's a car piled on top of another car. This is not Mexico and the Hurricane Patricia. This is over in Athens that this is happening. Now, this next story relates to the Hurricane Patricia as people in Mexico were preparing, and you'll hear the president of Mexico speak as they were preparing for this Category 5 to come in, but it thankfully went to a more unoccupied area and then reduced itself to just a Category 2.
Seen from the International Space Station, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded on the planet. The American astronaut Scott Kelly posted this photo online saying, "Looks menacing, stay safe below." But the strongest winds were tightly packed around the eye of the storm. Unfortunately, it came ashore in a less populated area. After chairing a cabinet meeting, the Mexican president said the damage had been less than feared, but the danger wasn't over yet.
I repeat, we can't yet lower our guard. I insist the most dangerous part of the hurricane has yet to enter the national territory.
Ahead of the storm, thousands of people were moved from coastal resorts, though some decided to stay on.
Yeah, I'm not afraid. You know, we've been taken good care of by the hotel, and, you know, it's going to happen.
The storm is now weakening as it moves inland, but it could still dump more than 20 inches of rain, triggering flash floods and landslides. And it looks set to merge with another storm system that's already caused serious flooding in Texas. People have been warned that a dangerous situation could develop over the weekend. And more, BBC News.
And friends, I don't think you said it in this report, but when it was a Category 5, the wind speed was upwards, over 200 miles per hour. Pretty heavy one. I think this one precedes the more current one I just played you, but then that gives some of the conditions before it reduced. Let's play this one.
With Hurricane Patricia about to make landfall, Mexico is bracing itself for the incoming storm. The country may be used to strong hurricanes and is well prepared, but this is unprecedented in the Pacific. Nobody knows what the reality will be. It's a race against time for tourists and locals caught in its path to reach a safe place. 10,000 tourists have already been evacuated from the resort of Puerto Vallarta alone. Those who remain will be sheltered in government refuges or safe areas of hotels and other public buildings.
The National Emergency Committee is in place, and I am taking charge at this moment. Preventive measures have already begun for what is estimated to be the biggest hurricane for at least the last 50 years in the Pacific Ocean.
Tracy Shilliam and her new husband are from Leicestershire, and they were enjoying their honeymoon before they were told earlier today that they had no choice but to wait out the storm.
As you can see behind us, there is a mattress up at the door. Curtains are all closed, and we're just waiting to be evacuated.
It's not just tourists who are in the eye of the storm. Mexico's busiest port is also in the path of Hurricane Patricia. Dozens of flights here have been cancelled today, and it's left many worried about their families who've had to remain in the region.
Seen from space, the extraordinary scale of the hurricane is clearly visible.
It literally is mind-boggling. The only way to describe it is potentially catastrophic. And it's still finding a 200-mile-per-hour Category 5 hurricane.
This is a waiting game. Hurricane Patricia may be entering the record books, but her achievements are a terrifying reality for those who are left behind. Katie Watson, BBC News, Mexico.
All right, friends, I wanted you to be able to see the details they were giving about that more than 200 miles per hour. Now, I've got a story that relates to the fourth seal, which is depicted by, let's put that on this chart on the screen for a moment. The fourth seal is depicted by a pale horse, in Revelation is depicted as a pale horse, with a rider whose name is Death, alongside whom rides Hades, hell, the grave. And Jesus Christ described it in plain language in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 as loimas, disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt, pestilence. And he also described a couple other things that would happen between the third and the fifth seals, increasing seismic activity, commotions in the air, such as the hurricane we mentioned, Hurricane Patricia, and typhoons and tornadoes, and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and tsunamis and wildfires and floods, etc. But the main thing for the seal 4 is the disease epidemics, and there's a story from yesterday's news related to that, to the fourth seal, disease epidemics. And let me introduce that one to you. New York steps up its war on rats after increase in numbers. Rats have long been a feature of New York, but authorities have been forced to step up the war on rodents, including gerbils and rats. Rodents have been known to carry the Black Plague, to carry a plague. And some say it comes more from the gerbils, but it also comes from the rats and rodents. A record number of complaints across the city of New York has come in. Some 24,000 people have called a hotline so far this year, and that's only to report the ones they've seen above ground. We've got this report on that because it relates to disease epidemics that could grow, problems within the United States that indicate God is allowing us to reap the curses He promised that if we disobeyed. He promised this in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. Starts out by saying, if you obey me, blessing after blessing, protection after protection. I'll make you the head, not the tail, the lender, not the borrower. 5 of you will chase 100. 100 of you will put 10,000 of your enemies to flight. And other promises of blessing. Rain in due season, which means no floods, no drought, none of this hurricane-like stuff. I'll protect you from it. Rain in due season, not I'll protect you. But if you disobey me, then I'll make you the tail, not the head. I'll make you the borrower, not the lender. That should be a red flag right there telling us, hey, wow, we keep raising our debt ceiling. We must not be obeying God. That's the conclusion we should draw from the blessing and cursing chapters. We're under cursings that we get when we disobey. Duh. Real simple, actually, when you read it and just simply understand it. We're under great curses. Look at this disease epidemic that's part of the curses that come upon a nation that disobeys with this report from Elaine Jung from the BBC.
A day in the life of a New York rat. Where the rubbish is, you'll often find the plucky rodents feasting, and New Yorkers are fed up.
We saw a rat the other day carrying a slice of pizza down the stairs. That pizza shouldn't have been there, they leave things all the time.
This is something that they're going to have to tackle, and it's going to have to be an aggressive tackle.
Complaints to the city's 311 hotline reached over 24,000 so far this year. The man who looks after the city's finances says the problem's getting worse.
All right, friends, I just wanted to give you a little idea on that, and we watch that kind of thing Sunday through Thursday night on Nightcast. I know a lot of you who watch me on the Sabbath are aware we do the daily current news related to the Bible and prophecy daily, Sunday through Thursday night, about a 45-minute program each night, live at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, 9 Eastern time each evening. Then we put it in the archive. You can watch it on demand anytime. And I want to just give you some highlights of current news. These are from yesterday's news stories. And then we're going to go to what happened on Wednesday with the United Nations making 2 prominent Israel landmarks in Israel, making them Muslim sites. The UN sticking their nose in Israel doing that. We'll get to those stories in a moment. First, this dramatic video footage, nighttime pictures of video have emerged of thousands of migrants crossing Croatia's border with Slovenia. This video and these pictures in it were shot from a Slovenian police helicopter using a thermal camera. and released to show how migrants are helped to cross the border illegally, as Rifa Chakrabarti explains.
A passenger train, unannounced according to the Slovenians, full of refugees and migrants, is captured approaching the border on the Croatian side. What appears to be thousands of people pile out. The thermal camera turns them into ghostly figures. They include small children. They're apparently escorted by Croatian police towards the border with Slovenia. The procession through the village is at first orderly, but the officers then appear to stand aside and to let the tide of migrants pass. They head towards the river which marks the border with Slovenia. After a while, the migrants decide to cross by wading through the water. The Slovenian authorities say it's clear from the film that the Croatians didn't try to stop them. Fearing for the safety of wet and freezing people, the Slovenians say their helicopter used a searchlight to direct them to a better crossing point.
Okay, now I want to tell you about what happened in this Wednesday with the tomb of the Patriarchs and Rachel's tomb being made Muslim sites by the United Nations. First of all, let me mention, I think I did mention this earlier. I was on this morning. I'm on this. I got up real early to do that before I fed my donkey. My donkey came to the window and brayed during the morning service for all my neighbors to hear. Hey, Steve didn't feed me yet. Well, I fed her between services, between morning and afternoon. And I'm not sure if I told you, but the cartoon that I showed at the beginning of today's service during the live streaming, we had to cut out for the archive because I don't have a license for the music when we put it in the archive. So I can't, under that situation, I cannot put things with music that I don't have a license for the music. I can't put it in that archive. So we show it to you live. There's an advantage to watching live. So when you didn't see the cartoon, but we will stick it in our social media. I can stick it in one of my Facebook pages, either my personal page or on the Sabbath TV channel page. And I'll stick that cartoon there. So you can watch it there, and then when you watch here, and I refer to the cartoon, you can go over there and watch it. So you'll be able to see it. All right, but now this story from Wednesday's news, October 21. This week, this Wednesday, today's October 24. We're just talking about 3 days ago, October 21. And I'm going to read this to you from several different sources so you really get the flavor of what happened. This first news source, I'll tell you what it is after I read it to you because it's down at the bottom of this report. UNESCO declares, and we'll explain UNESCO in a minute, it's part of the United Nations. UNESCO declares Tomb of Patriarchs and Rachel's tomb Muslim sites. This is from honestreporting.com. I got this from several different sources. This one seemed to word it the most favorably to the ear. It says, UNESCO passed a resolution condemning Israeli aggression on the Temple Mount and recognizing the tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron and Rachel's tomb between Bethlehem and Jerusalem as Muslim sites. The Palestinians were forced to back off efforts to declare the Western Wall a Muslim site when UNESCO chief Irina Bokova postponed a vote on that. How about that, folks? And this story relates to that cartoon movie I showed earlier on Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. And the jealousy that Ishmael has against Israel and the lies that Ishmael, through the Quran, Ishmael's descendants, I should say, promote, the lies that Ishmael's descendants promote through the Quran, trying to say that Abraham took Ishmael up on the mountain and offered him as a sacrifice, and so God promised the land to Ishmael. That is not the way it happened. If you believe that, and you believe that the lies in that book, the Quran, you are deceived, and a deceived person doesn't know they're deceived, and you're not going to agree with me if you're deceived. You're going to say, no, you're wrong. Well, you'll find out. You'll find out. We're all going to find out because, unfortunately, a lot of Israel is. We're going to find out some things because, unfortunately, the house of Israel, the house of Judah, are all guilty of many sins that are going to cause God to let us go into captivity again after 1/3 of us are killed by sword, 1/3 of us killed by famine and pestilence, then the other third taken captive, and many of those die in captivity, and a small number be allowed to live on over into the millennium, the world tomorrow. And I'm giving it to you short scope there. Some of you already understand that, so I'm just repeating it for you. UNESCO passes, here's another version of this story. I'll tell you where this news source is in a moment. UNESCO passes Arab resolution. Cave of Patriarchs is Islamic. This is from the Israel National News, and it says, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, that's what UNESCO stands for. The UN and UNESCO stands for United Nations, of course, and then the rest of UNESCO, the ESCO part, stands for Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And those letters, as an acronym, spell out the sound UNESCO, as they say it. But that United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, passed a resolution Wednesday, this past Wednesday, October 21st, listing the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron and Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem as Muslim sites. This news story goes on to say the resolution, which passed with 26 in favor, 6 voted against, and 25 abstentions, condemned Israel for archaeological excavations in the old city of Jerusalem, and particularly near the Temple Mount. Now, I've been involved in that dig near the Temple Mount. That Mr. Armstrong made arrangements for Ambassador College to co-sponsor that and be part of an annual dig over there near the Temple Mount. All of that is being condemned. This week was condemned on Wednesday in a United Nations resolution condemning Israel for archaeological excavations in the old city of Jerusalem and particularly near the Temple Mount. An initial draft of the resolution had also called for the Kotel, that's the Western Wall, to be listed as an Islamic site, or more specifically as an, quote, extension of the Aqsa Mosque. But that detail was hastily withdrawn after widespread condemnation, including from UNESCO's own Director General. The revised draft also toned down some of the more blatant anti-Israel language in the original, including referring to Jerusalem as, quote, the occupied capital of Palestine. How about that for boldness? But that was toned down. They didn't do that, thankfully. They wanted to, and that's the way they think. So that got toned down. Nevertheless, the resolution accepted Wednesday does co-opt 2 other ancient Jewish holy sites, the Cave of the Patriarchs and Rachel's tomb, which contained the remains of the Jewish patriarchs and matriarchs, which are regular sites of pilgrimage for Jewish worshippers. Both sites, however, have seen Muslims lay claim to them as well, which including the building of mosques directly on top of the Jewish shrines. The resolution was backed by 6 Arab UNESCO members: Algeria, Egypt, Kuwait, Morocco, Tunisia, and the United Arab Republic, UAE, who spearheaded the initiative on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. The only countries who voted against were the United States, Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic, and Estonia. The resolution deeply deplores the recent repression in East Jerusalem and the failure of Israel, the occupying power, it's the news story notes, to cease the persistent excavations and works in East Jerusalem, particularly in and around the Old City. It also calls for prompt reconstruction of schools, universities, cultural heritage sites, cultural institutions, media centers, and places of worship that have been destroyed or damaged by the consecutive Israeli wars on Gaza. Israel has, in fact, allowed construction materials into the Gaza Strip, but construction work has been moving at a snail's pace due to corruption and inefficiencies, as well as some donor states failing to deliver on their pledges of funding to the Hamas government. The news agency AFP contributed to this report. And I've got another report saying basically the same thing. I'm going to read that to you too. United Nations just gave Rachel's tomb and Patriarch caves to Islam. This is from charismanews.com. And as I read this one, I'm going to put Rachel's tomb up on screen, full screen for you for just a moment. This is an old black and white photograph of Rachel's tomb. UNESCO passed a resolution Wednesday, October 21st, declaring 2 biblical Jewish sites, Rachel's tomb, which you're seeing here in this picture, near Bethlehem, and also the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, as they've declared them to be Islamic holy sites. I'm going to run the photographs forward just a little bit and see if I can get the Caves of the Patriarchs in view here. Yeah, here we go. I believe this is the area of the Caves of the Patriarchs. I've been to both places, but we're talking about more than approximately 35 years ago. So it's been a while since I've been there, but I have been there. Now, an earlier draft of the resolution, sponsored by 6 member nations of UNESCO's executive board, again, Algeria, Egypt, Kuwait, Morocco, Tunisia, and the United Arab Emirates, included the Western Wall, known in Hebrew as the Kotel, calling it an extension of the Aqsa Mosque and therefore a Muslim holy site as well. The revised version dropped that claim. The resolution also accused Israel of, quote, aggression and illegal measures on the Temple Mount that affect Muslims' freedom of worship and access to the Aqsa Mosque. It further accused Israel of attempting to change the status quo since 1967, literally the opposite of what Israel is trying to do. The majority of UNESCO's 56 member nations have historically supported Palestinian resolutions, so Wednesday's vote was not totally unexpected. For Bible-believing Jews and Christians, the idea that these biblical sites somehow morphed into Islamic sites is ludicrous. The Bible records that Abraham purchased the cave and the field next to it some 3,700 years ago as a family burial site. You can see that in the chapters of Genesis 23 through 25, with the exception of Jacob's second wife, Rachel, the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, who was buried near Bethlehem. And for that, you can see Genesis 35, verses 16 through 20. And that's Rachel's tomb there in this photograph. Now, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon arrived in Israel on Tuesday to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas. But he went to Mr. Netanyahu first, Mr. Netanyahu said, I think it's time to tell the truth about Palestinian terrorism, Mr. Netanyahu said in his initial remarks to the UN chief. Mr. Netanyahu went on and said, it's not about the settlements, it's not about the peace process, it's about the desire to destroy the state of Israel, pure and simple. We played his words to you one night this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, Wednesday night, in a video. Now, Abbas, he said, has joined the ranks of ISIS and Hamas in propagating the lie that Israel is, quote, threatening the Aqsa Mosque. The international community should hold him accountable for incitement and should support Israel's right to self-defense, Mr. Netanyahu said. Ban, for his part, said he is, quote, deeply troubled, in fact, concerned about instances of inflammatory rhetoric. We need to keep the situation from escalating into a religious conflict with potential regional applications, Ban Ki-moon said, admitting that he understands Israel's anger at daily terror attacks, and he also appreciates, quote, the genuine concern about peace and security that terrorism generates. In a letter Tuesday to UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova, the B'nai B'rith International strongly condemned, quote, the attempt to rewrite history, calling it a malicious resolution and urging her to steer the executive board clear of such a vile proposal, quote unquote. The creeping but undisguised historical revisionism and territorial, cultural, and civilizational appropriation taking root at UNESCO make clear which side in the conflict is truly inciting religious tensions and seeking to alter the status quo in Jerusalem, the letter stated. Bukova's earlier statement to UNESCO's executive board, quote, to take decisions that do not further inflame tensions on the ground and that encourage respect for the sanctity of the holy sites, is not reflected in Wednesday's vote. A Palestinian mob recently torched Joseph's tomb, and attacks on Israelis visiting Rachel's tomb and the Cave of the Patriarchs are not unusual. It remains to be seen how UNESCO's latest resolutions will play out. End quote. Now, friends, I've got several more stories on this same thing. Here's an update from lifeintheholyland.com. It says the sepulchre of Rachel is a modern building. This photograph goes with this story, really, friends. The sepulchre of Rachel is a modern building, a small dome surrounding a square chamber at one end, and nothing particular in form or material in any part of it. There's much of simple pathos in the Bible narrative, which will be read on the spot, or even with a faithful picture before one, with new and fresh interest. And, quote, and they journeyed from Bethel, and there was still some way to come to Ephrath, and Rachel died, and was buried in the way to Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar upon her grave, the same as the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. Now the pillar was still there when Moses wrote the narrative in the book of Genesis. It's long since been swept away, but 30 centuries of sorrow and suffering have not been able to sweep away the memory of it from the hearts of Rachel's posterity. This book says the movement is there, yet retaining the name of the patriarch's beloved wife. This is from Jerusalem, Bethany, and Bethlehem, page 115. And then in another book it says, this is an almost undisputed site. Jews, Muslims, and Christians of the world all agree that here Rachel was entombed. The pillar Jacob set up has long since disappeared, but some mark has marked the spot for 3,600 years. The present square structure, summoned by a central dome, is modern and we go inside. It's very modern. As you can see, I've been there some 35 years ago. It measures 23 feet on each side. The height of the wall is 20 feet, and the dome is 10 feet high. We should go back to this picture for that dome. The eastern chamber is 23 feet long by 13 feet broad. The inner chambers are used by the Jews who meet here every Friday to pray. And a few years ago, Sir Moses Montefiore repaired this building. And the source for this is a book, The Earthly Footsteps of the Man of Galilee. The present tomb, a Saracenic building, subsequent certainly to the crusading times, is neither rich nor imposing, but no sumptuous mausoleum is needed to keep in memory the grave of Rachel, the beautiful and beloved wife of Jacob, untimely taken away. It's mentioned by Jerome and in the Crusading Chronicles, and was visited by Mondrel 200 years ago. We may well recall how the prophet represents Rachel sitting, weeping for her children, as the long train of captive exiles passed from the south on their way to Babylon. And note how the tomb is close to the roadside. And then as we see Bethlehem not a mile distant, we understand how aptly the evangelist transfers the figure to the massacre of the innocents by Herod. Source for that is a book called Picturesque Palestine, Volume 1. That's a whole set of books. Now, friend, there's a great power shift that has occurred in... I've got a picture I got to show you. I might lead this up as we talk about it. Wednesday night I had a report, video report with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking, where he mentioned that the Mufti of Jerusalem had gone to Germany and made a personal visit with Adolf Hitler, during which Hitler had just supposedly had only the position to exile the Jews from Germany. And the Grand Mufti said, well, they're just going to come here to Jerusalem and surrounds Palestine if you do that. So Adolf Hitler, Mr. Netanyahu says, asked, well, what should I do? To which the Grand Mufti said, burn them. And so here's a picture of the Grand Mufti with Adolf Hitler. I'm going to leave that up while I tell you that there's since the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles this year, 2015, there's been a great power shift in the Middle East. I've got several stories that underscore that, and how the media was expecting a whole bunch of different things to happen in September. There was going to be a global financial collapse, a great earthquake, an asteroid strike that would wipe out humanity, a mega tsunami. But none of those things have occurred, not yet anyway. However, something did take place on September 28th, on the Blood Moon Day that occurred on the first day of Feast of Tabernacles this year, 2015, that has changed the balance of power in the world today. And the world is beginning to take notice, to become cognizant that a sea change in world affairs occurred on September 28, when President Putin of Russia stated in his UN speech that Russia can no longer tolerate Washington's vicious, stupid, and failed policies that have unleashed chaos, which is engulfing the Middle East and now Europe. Now that's Russia, and Putin's position. 2 days later, on September 30, Russia took over the military situation in Syria and began the destruction of the Islamic State forces. Putin has decisively shifted the power balance. Without issuing any verbal threats or engaging in any name-calling, Putin has decisively shifted the power balance, and the world knows it. Washington's response consists of name-calling, bluster, and more lies, some of which is echoed by some of Washington's ever more doubtful vassals. The only effect is to demonstrate Washington's impotence. If Obama has any sense, he will dismiss from his government the neoconservative morons who've squandered Washington's power, and he will focus instead on holding on to Europe by working with Russia to destroy rather than to sponsor the terrorism in the Middle East that is overwhelming Europe with refugees. Now, with that point in mind, you know, Obama has taken a position of we got to get Assad out of there. Russia is supporting Assad, and I played you a news story earlier this week showing how Assad went to Moscow and sat down with Putin and had a face-to-face visit. Then when he gets back to Syria, they release the news story. They don't release that story or news of that or pictures until after Assad is back safely in Syria. Now, one of my friends wrote this. He said, if Obama cannot admit a mistake, then the United States will continue to lose credibility and prestige around the world. Actually, he sent me that from the paulcraigroberts.org website. So that's a quote from Paul Craig Roberts. Another news story says the Russians appear to be succeeding where President Obama failed. The Russians have unleashed their own version of shock and awe in Syria, and the brutal efficiency of their airstrikes against ISIS targets has stunned many observers around the globe. For more than a year, the Obama administration has claimed that its bombing campaign in Syria has been a success, and yet ISIS has continued to grow stronger and gain more territory. But now, just over a few days, the tide of the conflict appears to have turned. The whole world has gotten a chance to see what a global superpower can truly do to a bunch of radical Islamic terrorists when it's focused and determined. The images that we've seen of hardened ISIS command centers being wiped off the face of the map by Russian bombs are truly impressive. But why did those targets still exist in the first place? Was the United States military unable to identify them previously, or could it be possible that the Obama administration did not want to hit them? Of course, the mainstream media in the United States is downplaying the effectiveness of these attacks by Russia. The Obama administration is very much against these Russian airstrikes, and it's quite an embarrassment to the United States that the Russians are doing what the United States was either unwilling or unable to do. These Russian airstrikes are intended to pave the way for ground assaults by Syria and Iranian troops, and if ISIS begins to lose a lot of territory inside Syria in the coming weeks, a lot of people are going to have some very serious questions regarding why previous United States attempts were seemingly so unsuccessful. The following comes from Zero Hedge. Quote, now obviously, one must consider the source here, but Kremlin spin tactics aside, one cannot help but be amazed with the pace at which this is apparently unfolding. If any of the above is even close to accurate, it means that Russia is on schedule to declare victory over ISIS and everyone else, it looks like, in a matter of weeks, which would not only be extremely embarrassing for Washington, but would also effectively prove that the United States has never truly embarked on an honest effort to rid Syria of the extremist groups the Western media claims are the scourge of humanity. Without a doubt, this entire episode is making the Obama administration look rather pathetic. As promised by God, and it's happening right now, he said, I will break the pride of your power. Leviticus 26:19. For weeks, Obama seemed to have little idea what the Russians intended to do in Syria, and now that the Russians are bombing the living daylights out of ISIS, the best that Obama can do is whine loudly about it. The Russians appear to be succeeding where Obama failed, and this has put the United States government in a very precarious position in the Middle East. After seeing the Russians have had such good success inside Syria, the president of Iraq is now considering asking the Russians to conduct a similar campaign inside his own nation. Of course, the truth is that the United States could have dealt a decisive blow to ISIS long ago if it truly wanted to. The Obama administration was hoping that some combination of ISIS and other Islamic terror groups would ultimately topple Assad and bring about regime change in Syria. Now that appears very unlikely to ever happen, and the Russians have greatly strengthened their hand in the Middle East. So what will Obama's next move be? This news source says nobody knows for sure, but it will almost certainly be the wrong one. That's from the endoftheamericandream.com. Now, news is telling us this. Well, one thing President Obama did next was he withdrew an aircraft carrier from the Mideast. Why would the United States of America remove this aircraft carrier right at the time it was apparently needed? United States aircraft carrier CVN-71 Theodore Roosevelt is currently on its way out of the Persian Gulf, having just the LHD-2 Essex amphibious warfare ship group to defend the Persian Gulf, and more importantly, leaving the hotly contested Middle East without U.S. carrier-based air support for the first time in years. Friends, we're going to wrap it off right there. The situation is this. I want you to stay tuned. I want you to tune in Sunday through Thursday nights to Nightcast as we cover the day's world news related to the Bible and prophecy. One of the big things you're seeing is that beginning on the Feast of Tabernacles this year, September 28, 2015, Feast of Tabernacles 2015, the first day of the feast, Putin made that announcement in the United Nations that clearly shows that the pride of the power of the United States is going down. And the great financial collapse that many news organizations predicted and other catastrophes have not occurred yet. But God is first allowing the pride of our power to be broken. It's an opportunity for people to fast and repent. But will we? Brethren, those of you who are watching here, we can do that ourselves individually, and we can be watching world events as Christ instructed us to do in Luke 21, verse 36. And verse 34, he said, take heed of your own conduct. Don't be guilty of surfeiting, of gluttonousness, or of being overly concerned with the cares of this world. So right there, verse 34, take heed to yourselves. Watch your own conduct. But then in verse 36, he's not saying watch your conduct. He's saying watch the events that I've just been describing in this chapter and in the parallel, this chapter, Luke 21, and in the parallel chapters of Matthew 25 and Mark 13, where I've been discussing the seals of Revelation. And to that point in verse 36, he's been discussing the first 4 seals. He also mentions the 5th seal, and he mentions the rest of the seals, but he says, if you watch the seals that are active, and you pray always, with the word always coming from en paskaros, en, one word, pas, another Greek word, and then kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, another word. All of that meaning not simply always in a lighthearted sense. That means from the bottom of your being, with all of your being, from the top of your head to the tip of your whole toes, always, with all your might, mind, soul, day and night, be watching and praying about world events. Praying for the people, praying, God, your kingdom come. We need it. These poor people are being killed and hurt and harmed, and some people aren't eating in some places, and things are pretty, even though food on my table and I'm okay, but there are disease epidemics here and there, and there's this and that. Be watching it all and praying about it, and God says, always. And God says, if you really take it to heart, he says, then you're being a real Philadelphian. Now, if you just study, and you can know a lot, you can know a whole lot more than a person God considers to be of a Philadelphia attitude. Oh, you can have it 2-to-1 over their knowledge. But if you're not doing what God says do, if you're not watching and praying, you're showing God a lukewarm attitude, and God says, I have no choice. I have to leave you behind when the next thing, and what he's saying in Luke 21:36 is that you may be accounted worthy to escape what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Let's put this slide up on the screen for a moment so we can make it visualized as we cover it. What's happening at the moment, and what's with increasing intensity, is the first 4 of the 7 seals of the book of Revelation. The first 4, many of you know them, they're represented by the 4 horsemen of what's called the apocalypse. That's just a Greek word for revelation, the Greek word for revelation. And God imaged them in 4 different colored horses. The white horse, depicted in Revelation, that Jesus Christ described in plain language, depicting the first seal, represents false religions, deceivers, antichrist. The second seal, depicted by a red horse in Revelation, that Jesus Christ described in plain language, would be wars and rumors of wars and the commencement of round 3 of World War as Europe unites. The third seal, represented by a black horse in Revelation, that Jesus Christ described in plain language with the Greek word loimos, meaning, with limos actually there, meaning famines or scarcity of food. And then the 4th seal, depicted in Revelation as a pale horse with a rider whose name is Death, alongside whom rides Hades, or hell, the grave. And Jesus Christ described the actualities, the events of this horse, primarily as loimos, meaning pestilence, disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt. But Christ also said that between the 3rd and the 5th seal, we would see increased seismic activity, seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, such as the hurricane just below and into Mexico now, Hurricane Patricia, typhoons, tornadoes, all kinds of gale force winds, and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, etc. And he also mentioned that between the 3rd and 5th seal, we would see increasing terike, trouble, roiling waters, literally and figuratively. Figuratively as mobs and seditions, and literally as roiling waters and trouble. But not the mega trouble of the next thing to happen in prophecy that occurs when the 5th seal begins, that Jesus Christ described in plain language as the Great Tribulation, saying further in Matthew 24, verses 20-21, that it's a time of trouble so great that no time of trouble since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor ever after, is going to be as bad as what's coming in this Great Tribulation. It's called in Jeremiah 30, I think it is, the time of Jacob's trouble. It's all the same thing. Great Tribulation, the greatest time of trouble ever to hit mankind. It will be, let's pull out for a moment. It will be the time of a great martyrdom of God's saints. If I pull out, let's pull out studio-wise far enough. Well, this will be far enough so we can go to those slides over my shoulder that show you. See, am I going to hit them right here? Right dead center, we got the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, and this slide is labeled as the Great Tribulation and shows the events that happened during this Great Tribulation. Over on your left side, top left side, it shows martyrdom of God's saints. The greatest time of martyrdom ever. It's going to make Fox's Book of Martyrs look like a little small-town phone book compared to the great, say, New York metropolis of phone books for all of the 5 districts, the Bronx and Manhattan and all. It's just going to make, as someone once put it, I don't know how you could call a martyrdom like a picnic, but it's going to make what Fox's Book of Martyrs described in several volumes look like nothing, or a picnic in comparison to the huge martyrdom that's coming during this Great Tribulation. It'll also be the time of the commencement of World War III. It'll be the time that this crown that you see in the center of this picture, which is actually a photograph of the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. I've seen this with my own eyeballs, took my own picture of it. You could go see it too, because it's been on display for more than 35 years. I saw it when they first brought it over there and opened it up to the public. When they put it in the Royal Treasury, sometime in the early 1980s, in Vienna. As soon as I got news of that, Aaron Dean, while we were in Israel together, handed me a faxed advanced copy of the Worldwide News and said, "Hey, look here, Steve, the crown of the Holy Roman Empire is going to be on display over in the Royal Treasury in Vienna." Well, actually, he handed me the report. I saw that myself inside of the entire advanced copy of the Worldwide News, and I said, "Aaron, hey, look at this." I said, there was a reason I had to slip out of the hotel and avoid, I had upset, I guess I can tell you this, I had upset Stanley Rader to the point that he said, "Next time I see Gilbreath, I am putting him out of the church." He was jealous over something Mr. Armstrong did with me during that visit that just made him very upset. They were planning on doing something Mr. Rader did Mr. Armstrong a lot of good. I actually hate to talk against him, and yet he pulled something that was a shock and surprise, where he was going to do an evil against Mr. Armstrong. He was going to have him put in a nursing home and declared by a court as senile. Yeah. Anyway, he saw me as interfering with their plan, which he thought I knew, but I didn't. I just knew certain things, but I didn't know the whole story. But anyway, he threatened, he told Aaron, he said, "Next time I see Gilbreath, I'm putting him out of the church." Aaron warned me, and Aaron helped me slip out of the hotel after I locked myself in my hotel room for a few days. I moved rooms and told the hotel, don't tell anybody where I am, that I'm even here. And Aaron helped me slip out, and I headed off. There were some things Aaron had to hide from him too. He got death threats. There was some horrible things happened at one point in time. But I don't want to shock anybody's faith. But to get out of a terrible situation and to see, just wanted to see that crown once I knew it was on display. I said, "Aaron, I'm taking a plane from Israel to France." I forget where I flew, Paris or Marseille, one or the other, whichever place I was able to get a train through Germany to Vienna. Beautiful train ride. I needed that relaxation after having that run-in with Mr. Rader. And so I took that train ride to Vienna, and I saw that crown with my own eyeballs. That crown is going to be worn once again for its 7th and final time during the 7th and final revision of the Holy, I guess best way to say it, restoration of the Holy Roman Empire for one last time, and that triggers the Great Tribulation. That happens during the last and final restoration of the Holy Roman Empire. The 6th restoration of that empire came during Mr. Armstrong's heyday, early days of coast-to-coast broadcasting, when after Mussolini had invaded Ethiopia and announced himself as Il Duce, as the new head of a restored Holy Roman Empire, which he was from 1936 to 1945. He revived the Holy Roman Empire to be its sixth head. Therefore, he fulfilled the one is prophecy of Revelation 17, verse 10, where God says there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. Now, for a long time, students of prophecy have known who the 5 that are fallen were. They've known of Justinian. They've known of Charlemagne, who you see in this portrait being crowned by the Pope. They knew of Otto the Great here. Well, let's see. I may be getting these names wrong because, well, yeah, that's Otto, and this is Charles the Fifth. He was the 4th. Yeah, so there was Justinian, there was Charlemagne, like I said, and then Otto was the 3rd, and now here the 4th of these 7 kings, of the 5 kings who are fallen, the 4th of the 5 kings who are fallen is Charles the 5th, and then the 5th king that is now fallen is Napoleon. And he fell and lost the Holy Roman Empire in the year before the Battle of Waterloo, when he lost the continuous reign of 1,260 years of the Holy Roman Empire. But with Satan as the god of this world, Satan has Napoleon try to upset history and try to recapture the Holy Roman Empire again with the Battle of Waterloo, and that was a major loss for him. It looked like he should have won it, but that was his Battle of Waterloo, his final and last battle of all time for Napoleon. So he was not able to revive or restore the Holy Roman Empire that he lost the previous year in 1814, so that from 554 AD to 1814 AD was 1,260 years, a prophetic length of years that Holy Roman Empire ran continuously and then went into the pit. And then over 100 years later, from 1814 to 1936, while the Holy Roman Empire was in the abyss and the pit, then here comes this one is, who was the 6th head from 1936 to 1945, April 28, 1945. I might have said that wrong earlier, but it was April 28, 1945, that Mussolini was shot and then hung upside down from a canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy, as you see in this photograph here, along with his mistress and his comrades. And that put the Holy Roman Empire back into the abyss until our day today, when that crown of the Holy Roman Empire just sits in the royal treasury, well guarded behind a glass cage in Vienna, Austria. But when those 10 nations come together that will give their power to what the Bible calls a beast, that crown will then once again be worn, and the Holy Roman Empire will be revived for its 7th and final time, and then commences round 3 of World War, a great martyrdom of God's saints. It'll be the time when Philadelphia is given the promise Christ made in Luke 21:36, where he says, watch, pray always about these first 4 events of active now. You'll be able to avoid the next major event in prophecy, the 5th seal of Revelation, the Great Tribulation. You will be accounted worthy to escape it if you pray about these first 4 active now. Whew! That is a promise well worth having, brethren. So continue to watch the news, whether you do it with me on Nightcast Sunday through Thursday night or somehow on your own. We make it easier for you, though. We look for the ones that relate to these seals, give you the most pertinent ones that we watch to see, and ask God to help show us, could this possibly be pushing together the 10-nation union that will give, 10 leaders will give their power to a beast? And the Holy Roman Empire commenced, then they'll, with their military alliance, Mr. Armstrong told us to watch for a economic union. They got that with the euro. With a political union, they got that, pulling that together with the nations, although that's still shaping around. And watch for a military union to come together for that united Europe. And that'll spring together, possibly boom, boom, overnight, because Germany is already making weaponry, big weaponry. It's amazing the Allies let them do that. But we just turned a blind eye since World War II. This we don't have to worry about Germany anymore. Duh. Remember they did World War I, then they did round 2, World War II. They're going to be the head of World War III, round 3. And God is going to use them to punish the sons of Israel, as he says he will do because of our disobedience, that if we want to avoid, we need to repent. Brethren, the world is not going to repent. I wish they would. I wish if you are of the world out there watching, I wish you would help the rest of the world repent. We didn't have to watch and go through all that. But God knows, just like he knew Adam and Eve, it was stacked against them. They were going to sin. He may have been a little shocked that they did it as early as they did, perhaps. But, he knows the tendency of man, and so he's predicted what will happen if man doesn't repent. And that is, we will have 1/3 of the nation die, and 1/3 of the sons of Joseph. That's not just this nation, the United States, the modern-day descendants of Manasseh. That's also the United Kingdom, the modern-day descendants of Ephraim, and Canada, who are also part of the descendants of Ephraim. And there may be a little mix-up there, yeah, but basically the United States, the United Kingdom, including Canada, 1/3 of our people will die from the sword. 1/3 of, they're going to send in bombs and just take out all our cities, and 1/3 of the people will die from all that. 1/3 will die from famine and pestilence that follow that kind of warfare. When there's, you destroy cities, you destroy food supplies, people die of famine. Pestilence starts from famine. And so that's 2/3 of the people die from that. The other 1/3 will be taken captive, and many of the people will die in captivity. We're told by examples in the Bible that show just a little bit of the beard is left in the skirt. And those people will be allowed by God to live on over into the world tomorrow. But that'll be a small percentage. 90% or more will die from those combinations of 1/3 by sword, 1/3 by famine and pestilence, 1/3 all but a few of the 1/3 in captivity. They'll die in captivity. And then God's millennium will be here, hooray, hoorah. But during that great tribulation, brethren, you, by being Philadelphia in attitude, visit the fatherless and the widows, watch the news and pray about it always from the bottom of your heart. Don't miss a single night of our Nightcast broadcast, whether you watch it live or watch it in an archive later, because we pull out the news for you. We spend the whole day doing it, pulling out the things you need to see, and we put it in 45 minutes, sometimes 30-minute telecast for you that you can watch easily, and then get on your knees, and while everything's still fresh, pray about those news stories you saw, and then think about them till the next broadcast. Think, and pray within your heart so that God sees you as Philadelphia. How about that? I'm all for every one of you being able to escape the tribulation to come. That's my goal that I've continued, that Robert Collins had for you, that Mr. Armstrong had for you. God, through Mr. Armstrong, told us there's 2 goals that should be foremost for us. One is the resurrection and the first resurrection. And like unto that, and in preparation and on the way toward the first resurrection, being accounted worthy to escape the great tribulation. Being accounted worthy of the first resurrection, and on the way being accounted worthy to escape the great tribulation. That's a very worthy goal to have. And God says, here's the way. Verse 36, Luke 21, gives you the guide for that. Watch and pray always so that you may be accounted worthy to escape. Bingo. There's a formula in a nutshell for you. Definitely a goal to put in your pipe and smoke, or, a thing to be doing. Watch our newscast Sunday through Thursday night. Pray about the things you see on it. And brethren, God grant you the great gift and blessing of being accounted worthy to escape the tribulation on the way, that probably started like a character that Satan used back during round 2 of World War. Over on the right side of that picture had Adolf Hitler. And the Grand Mufti was like unto him, burn them. What should I do with the Jews? Hitler asked. The Grand Mufti said, burn them. And what shall he do with the people that want to obey God, the Jewish people, and those who keep the Sabbath, who are as if they were Jews, spiritual Jews? What shall be done with them during round 3 of World War? Burn them, kill them in some way, gas them, tear them apart, electrocute them, whack their heads off with a guillotine, torture them for a while first. Brethren, be accounted worthy to escape. Watch the news, pray about it. Let's do this together. All right? Have a good rest of the Sabbath. If you're accounted worthy to escape, that's something to hooray about. You see your friends left behind, you got to pray for them. You go. But have a good rest of the Sabbath, brethren and friends, and I'll see you if you're back here next Sabbath. See you back here. Or if you're watching with us during the news, God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll see you Sunday night back here for Nightcast. Now let me go quickly and find, I think I got right here a place we can sign off with. So I'll say, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath saying, thanks for joining me, and so long until next time. P.S. That cartoon will be, I'm going to stick it in one of our pages in Facebook. And for those of you watching on the archive who said, well, what happened to the cartoon? Well, I'm going to stick it on Facebook. I can stick it there. And I'll shorten it down to 20 minutes by speeding it up just a hair. And you'll find it on Facebook, okay? Can't put it in our archive, except the live internet stream hosting archive for 30 days, and then it has to go from there. Okay, so long. Until next time.